Grey mullet are wide-ranging throughout the UK and Ireland and are often some of the most readily accessible marine species in an area. On balanced tackle, these athletic fish can provide sizzling sport and have few equals in terms of pound-for-pound battling prowess, at least in these waters. Mullet do have a reputation for being difficult to catch though, and it's perhaps this perception that gives many anglers pause for thought. Whilst it's true that mullet can be impossible to tempt when they're not feeding, you could argue that so are most fish. It's just in the case of mullet, you can so often see them blatantly ignoring your offerings. Despite this reputation for trickiness, when they're in the mood, grey mullet of all three species can be very obliging, providing you're offering them something they want. One of the simplest ways to catch mullet is by spinning, using a modified spinner either baited with actual ragworm or something that resembles it. Although there are a few subtleties that can make a difference, the technique itself is simple and has an enjoyable hunting aspect to it, as you're always on the lookout for signs of fish and reacting to them. So the idea of fishing with baited lures from the shore has been around for a long time. Although it's mainly associated with mullet and flatfish these days, baited lures will catch a wide variety of species, and indeed you'll pick up other types of fish when using the method for mullet. In modern sea angling, baited spinners are most commonly used as the frontline method for catching thin-lipped mullet, a species that responds well to the spinner virtually everywhere it's found. The two remaining grey mullet species, the thick-lipped and golden grey, are far less commonly fished for with spinners, particularly the thick-lipped. Indeed, some anglers will tell you that you can't catch thick-lips with mullet spinners. As I'll show you in this video though, that's not the case. And both thick-lips and golden greys will readily take the spinner, although particularly in the case of the thick-lip, this does seem to be more venue and situation dependent than it is with thin-lips and golden greys. So baited spinners can take a variety of forms, but all will follow the same basic pattern, a rotating blade trailing a hook or an arrangement of hooks. The hook is separated from the blade by a short distance, usually using a trace of stiff line, or sometimes people use wire. The preferred distance between the blade and the hooks is something that will vary from angler to angler, and the fish will sometimes show a preference in this area, so it's worth carrying a few different variations of spinners or to be prepared to adjust your spinners during your session. The easiest way to produce a mullet spinner is to take a ready-made spinner like a Mepps, cut off the treble and attach a trace with a hooking arrangement, although there are other methods which we'll look at later in the video. It's not entirely clear why mullet take the baited spinner. Grey mullet are not typically held to be predatory, although they will take fish imitating lures on rare occasions, and I have heard reports of mullet coughing up other fish when they've been caught, so it's not totally unfeasible that the response is predatory. A common theory is that the mullet mistake the spinner for a small fish with a little bit of food, and they try and muscle in and take the food off it, and this seems like a more likely scenario to me. A bare spinner on its own will typically just be ignored or sometimes followed and not taken, whereas the bait on its own can catch fish, so it's clear that the bait is the catalyst that makes the spinner work. Of the three grey mullet species, thick-lips are the most common and widespread, being found in a wide variety of environments, from the open sea to harbours and marinas, and right up into the freshwater reaches of rivers. The season for thick-lips varies by region, with most areas seeing the best fishing in the warmer months from spring through to autumn. In the southwest, Scilly Isles and Channel Islands, however, thick-lips are present all the year round. The best time for a big specimen can actually be the winter. Thick-lips grow to the larger sizes and are thick-set, powerful fish. In my experience, however, you are unlikely to catch larger thick-lips on the baited spinner, with most being smaller but still sporting examples. A thick-lip of over 5 pounds is a great fish anywhere though, and one of over 6 pounds is a real specimen. Thin-lipped mullet are most commonly found and fished for in rivers and estuaries during the spring through until the autumn, with the species running right up into freshwater at times, just like the thick-lip. Again though, this species can be found on the open shore and in harbours and places like that in some areas. Thin-lips tend to be more slimline than thicks and usually lighter in coloration, with a distinctive dark patch at the base of the pectoral. The difference in the body shape and the length of the pectoral fins is enough that, with experience, you can often tell the two species apart in the water. Thin-lips have a reputation for being inferior fighters to thick-lips, but I've not found there to be that much difference in practice, to be honest, and a game thin-lip is a real handful. Again, a thin-lip of 3 to 4 pounds is a good fish anywhere you catch it. One of over 4.5 pounds is a real beauty, with specimens of over 5 pounds definitely being on the cards in some areas. Golden greys are the most warm water loving of the three species and tend to show in numbers from May or thereabouts. You can find them in estuaries, but they never run as far up as the thicks and thins, preferring to stay in the more saline lower reaches. Most typically, however, you can often find them in shoals running along open sandy beaches, particularly during warm settled weather. They seem to especially love coming into the warm shallows on an incoming tide. Goldens are the smallest of the three species, with any fish of over 1.5 pounds being a nice example, and anything 2.25 plus being a nice specimen. In my experience, Goldens are the most athletic fighters and quite often take to the air, especially in shallow water. Their fast runs and frequent changes of direction mean that they need careful playing to avoid hook pulls. Goldens are quite readily distinguished from the other mullet by the fact that they are quite a bit slimier. On paper, the gold spot on the gill plate is a distinguishing feature of this species, but in practice, you'll find that many thicks sport a similar gold spot, and it's not a terribly reliable identifier. So today I've brought you to the River Camel at Weybridge. You might look at this and think thin lips, and you wouldn't be far wrong, there are thin lips in here, but it's one of those venues where you're just as likely, if not more so, to catch a thick lip on the baited spinner than you are on a thin. And that's why I've brought you here today, to show you that thick lips do take the baited spinner. It very much can be done, and I mean, on this venue you are much more likely to catch a thick than a thin on a baited spinner from my experience. So yeah, hopefully I'll show you a couple. Here we are, very typical River Camel thick lip mullet. Caught on a baited spinner. With a very good account of himself. Yeah, shot off across the river a couple of times. He was quite a spirited little fellow. I thought he was a thick lip when I hooked him, but he had a thin alongside him, following him alongside, so obviously they're mates. But as you can see, this one's taken a homemade spinner with yellow beads and a bubble float. It's the way to tackle these sort of more shallow water estuaries, river environments really. Very often you're fishing in pretty shallow water, so you need to keep the spinner up off the bottom really, so the fish can follow it and the spinner's ticking along nicely. Get this fella back now. Good bit of sport. Another little River Camel thick lip mullet on the baited spinner. Had a good little scrap with this one as well. He had a few runs across the pool. I'm actually catching these fish blind today because the wind is ruffling the surface so much. Although the water's clear, it's taken a lot to see the fish. Every now and again there's a little break in between where I can see some, but most of the time I'm just sort of like casting where I think they should be and going that way. And I've had quite a few knocks and a few hooked fish and a couple now, so it's the right method for today. Ordinarily I'd be trying to sight fish here, but today I'm having to fish blind a bit, but it's working. A couple of these fish, they're small, but they fight well, and it's been quite an enjoyable little session. It's pretty common to hear people say that thick lips won't take the baited spinner and they don't like it, and there's definitely venues and areas where that might be true, but in my experience fishing Cornwall, Devon, Dorset, I've caught thick lips on baited spinners everywhere. Maybe some places more than others, like even in Cornwall there's some venues that you won't catch a thick lip on a baited spinner, and there are some where you'll catch quite a lot of them. So it seems to be one of those things that changes from place to place. Another River Camel thick lip mullet on the baited spinner. This one took brown power isome, the XL stuff on the on the spinner. So it just goes to show you can use a 100% artificial approach with these thick lips and still get results. Off you go, my beauty. Just casting across and fishing blind now. The wind's causing quite a lot of chop on the water, so it's impossible to see anything. Lots of signs. Oh, there's a take. Lots of signs of fish near the surface though. Another one. Yeah. He wrapped himself. Is he still wrapped? I'm not sure what he's doing. Oh, he's come off. Has he? No. No, he's there. That was the weirdest thing. It looked like he'd come off, but when he's taken, he's wrapped himself in the line, got very confused, and now he knows where he is, and he's like, oh, I'm going to fight now. He took that 3 times on the way in. Number 3 of today, on the baited spinner with power isome again. This one's got a nasty wound on his underside. I don't know if that's it's healed, but it looks like something's had a really horrible go at it. But still, nice fit fish. Gave me a good battle. I'm gonna get it back now. Hopefully get one more. So hopefully I've demonstrated to your satisfaction that not only can you catch thick lips on baited spinners, if you get the venue right and the timings and the fish are in the mood, it can be pretty straightforward. I've had 2 short sessions while my kids have been at school. I've had 5 thick lips, 2 on regular rag and 3 on artificial. So that also proves that the thick lips are keen for the 100% artificial approach if that's the way you want to go with your fishing, and why not? It's really convenient. So I've had a good time, I've enjoyed it, and hopefully that'll help put some doubts to rest. Okay, so there's a couple of outfits you'll see me using in the video, and this is probably going to be the main one. This is a Drennan twin tip duo 12-foot 1.5 pound test curve rod. Very versatile rod this. It comes with a carbon tip and a feeder tip with a couple of glass tips, so it can double as your ledger rod too, which is very handy. At the moment I've got this with a Daiwa Ninja reel. This is a 2500A. I like this because it has excellent line lay, and it also has a backwind function, which is how I like to play my fish. So that makes me really happy. At the moment I've got Berkeley Nautil braid on it, this blue stuff in 18 pound. Really happy with this. I've found it great so far. Really nice line lay, cast nice, and I haven't had any wind knots yet, which is amazing for me because that's something I do struggle with a little bit in my spinning. Probably like some of you out there, so don't get too disheartened. I have the same problem. At the moment I usually use this with a bombarder float, and that's exactly what I've got on at the moment. This is a 15 gram one. I do use 20 grams sometimes as well. I've got 10 pound fluorocarbon leader to a homemade spinner. This is an unweighted job. I mostly use the bombarder with unweighted spinners, but I do sometimes use the weighted spinners as well on rare occasions. At the moment, yeah, I've got power isome on. I've got couple of pennel hooks there. Got a little bit of anti-tangle tubing on the spinner as well. That's something I've been experimenting with lately in the everlasting struggle to keep the worm straight behind the spinner. It's a constant battle, but it's worth doing everything you can to to fight it. This size 4 blade, some yellow beads on. The yellow beads are very important. They're something I have quite a lot of confidence in. I was told it years ago, and I've used it ever since, and it works well for me. And this charming little rod here is outfit number 2. This is a HTO lure game rod. It's 2.4 meters, which is not very long. I don't know how much it is in feet. It takes 5 to 25 grams, and it's a a fast action rod as well, so it's got a nice crisp feel to it. I actually reviewed this for the channel last year sometime, and there's a few pictures of thin lips and thick lips I've caught on it there. So at the moment this has a Shimano Old Tigra reel. I think this is a 3000. This doesn't have a backwind. I do like this reel, but I do wish it had a backwind, because I really don't like playing mullet off the drag because it feels a little bit jerky to me. I forget what braid I've got on this. It's really quite light though. It's very fine indeed, and it's bright yellow, which is quite nice because you can see it very well. I usually use a little swivel, and again this is £10 fluorocarbon, a little trace on, and I almost always use this with weighted spinners. At the moment this has got my favourite on it, the Hester style in 10 gram. It did used to have the red dots on, but the sticker came off. So this has been through a few sessions, this one. Again, I've got Penelux on with a bit of power isome. And yeah, I prefer to use this outfit when I can, but it does struggle a little bit in really shallow water. So through this video, I've ended up using the Bombarder outfit a lot more. But to be honest, I do prefer using this. It's just, it can be hard to keep these weighted spinners up in the water. You end up with the rod like that doing it, and it's not that comfortable. So I will do it, but for convenience, I quite often just turn to the Bombarder rod. But this is my favourite. Caught most of my better fish on this, and it's an absolute dream to play a fish on. I love catching fish on this rod.
Close my eyes, you're looking back at me. As real as autumn air, I take and breathe. Try as you might, but you can't.
So spinners come in a bewildering array of sizes and colours, but I'd recommend starting simple and expanding from there once you've got a bit of experience of what works well for you. A classic silver bladed spinner in size 4 will catch all 3 species. Be a great first choice everywhere you go. A lot of anglers swear by the good old Mepps Aglia, but it's never done much for me, and my favourite traditional spinner is a Hester style in the size 4 10 gram variant. As well as weighted spinners, I also like to use lures without any added weight at all, other than the blade of course. I used to use Dexter spin swivels to make these, adding a trace with a few yellow beads and whatever hooking arrangement made sense for the bait I was using. However, in the last few years I haven't been able to find any spin swivels. They seem to have gone out of stock everywhere, and I've recently had to go on to making my own spinners using a kit from a company called Spintech that my mate Mark lent me. These have really proven themselves to me, and I'm now happy with this as a solution for making unweighted spinners going forward. So obviously there's 3 main baits that will be found on my hooks when I'm mullet spinning. Those are king rag, which we all know and love, harbour rag, and of course the artificials, the like Muruku power isomi I use quite a lot. As far as king rag goes, I tend to prefer a medium worm if I can get them. Smaller worms, they tend to make too skinny a bait, or you end up using them in bunches or something like that, which is not ideal for king rag really. If it's too big, then obviously it's just a massive fat mouthful, but still I probably prefer that over worms that are too small. A medium worm sits nice and you can just nip the tail off, it makes a nice sized bait. As far as harbour rag goes, I tend to dig those in my local estuary, and they're pretty small, so I use those in bunches a lot. If I'm using a single hook, I'll thread one up the line and then maybe another one up the shank, and then head hook a couple more, pinch the tails off, and that's my bait, like a little bunch of worms. If I'm using a pennel, it's exactly the same process, except I'll slip the pennel hook into the first worm I put on, and then when I finish the bottom baits, I'll stick an extra rag on the pennel hook as well and nip the tail off, just so it's a really nice bundle of worms, and golden greys really seem to like that. As far as a power isome goes, I use the XL version of that, and although it comes out the packet lovely and straight, it can be a bit of a devil to keep straight on the hooks. You just have to keep checking that one quite a lot. For some reason it is quite prone to kink. I guess because it is stiff, unlike a living worm. Like if it goes into a weird attitude, it tends to stay there, and you get those horrible oscillations that fish just do not take. So if you're using the power isomi, do what you can to keep it straight and check it regularly, because sometimes it will get into a weird angle and it won't be good for your fishing. Other than that, it's absolutely great, and I love the fact that you can use one worm and catch a few fish on it. If it's quite durable, you know, you can get a few fish out of one worm, which is good because it's quite expensive. So, thin-lip mullet, the species most commonly associated with mullet spinning, and rightfully so, like it's undoubtedly the method that's most commonly used to catch them around the country. Today we're on the River Taw in North Devon. It's a place we featured last year in a video with Ollie Passmore, a local angler. We had some really nice thin lips that day, and this river is generally known for having a good stock of thin lip mullet and some really nice fish as well. Here we go, first River Taw thin lip mullet of the day. It was a bit, there's been plenty of fish around, but it's been hard getting their attention. But I saw like a black ball of fish on the other side of the river, just following the bank. And I kept on them, kept casting to them, and they were ignoring it. And all of a sudden one turned and took. And after that, it was like, that sort of triggered the others to have a go. And next cast I had this fella. So delighted with that. Hopefully more to come. A good tip to follow is if you can, always fish to a group of fish rather than trying to cast at single ones, if you can see them. If the fish are in a group, it's far more likely that one will be triggered onto the spinner, and then that will trigger the others to compete with it for grabbing the spinner, and yeah, you should get yourself an easy take then. Whereas single fish, they've got plenty of time to look at it, no one breathing down their neck, so they're harder to tempt. It can be done. I've chased single fish for a long time and eventually caught them, but yeah, you're far better off fishing to a group.
Yeah, I'm well happy with this. It's obviously not the thin I was targeting, but a nice thick lip is always welcome. Hit the spinner like a ton of bricks. Smoked a load of line off, but soon got him under control. Didn't manage to fall in, so a bonus.
So this morning Mark and I fished on a stretch of the Taw that Ollie Passmore showed me the year before. And after a break for lunch, we met up with Ollie again, and he took us to another of his favourite sections, a lovely deep pool that he had done well in recently. Ollie graciously put Mark in his favourite spot, and after a few follows, Mark hooked into a fighting fit thin lip. Mark's playing style differs a bit from mine. He uses more pressure and plays the fish off the drag. This style has the advantage of giving you greater control over the fish and stopping it getting you into a potentially perilous position. The trade-off, however, is that it will inevitably cost you some fish due to hook pulls. However you choose to play your fish, it's a good idea to ensure that the fish is tired before attempting to net it. It will be much easier to unhook and handle on the bank if it's worn out, and it will lose less scales as a result. Keep in mind that a long-handled landing net is absolutely essential for fishing these muddy riverbank environments, both for getting the fish safely on land and returning it safely to the water.
Well, Ollie's brought us to a new spot that we've not been before. We all had sort of half a dozen casts, and I was very lucky to snag this beauty. Put a very valiant scrap, and like all mullet, just don't like seeing the net.
Very typical of classic thin lip environments all around the country, this bit of river here. So the tactics that we're using today, pretty universal. The bombarder float is necessary today to be able to get the distance really and to control where the spinner's going. It's made a huge difference. Normally when I fish here, if it's not too windy, I won't bother with the bombarder, and I'll just fish a slightly heavier spinner with no float at all. I prefer that. It feels a little bit more direct to me, and I think it enables you to fish deeper, which on here, in this estuary at least, seems to be how you catch the bigger thin lips. The ones you can see aren't the biggest fish are sat underneath them, it seems like. So you run that spinner a bit deeper and you're contacting the bigger fish. So ideally I prefer to do that, but this wind has made things quite challenging, so the bombarder float is, yeah, godsend when it's like this. Yeah. It's another tiddler, I think. It's just very strange to be catching so many tiny fish, and there's clearly good ones out there. This is a stamp of the smaller fish we've been having. Very cute, but not really big enough to be sporting. So hopefully in a minute the bigger ones are going to start taking, fingers crossed, because we haven't got much more time. The tide's coming in shortly, so yeah. Still, we've had loads of these, so hopefully some bigger ones are going to follow. So as you can see behind me, the tide's starting to come in and there's plumes of mud being carried up the estuary, and it's got very, very murky. So that's the end of our fishing for today. It's been a pretty challenging day. The wind conditions have been tough at times, and the water clarity's not been all that great, although thankfully we have been able to see groups of fish, and thankfully there was mullet here today, because the last time we came there wasn't. So and yeah, we've caught plenty of fish. Granted, the vast majority of them have been very small, but we've had 2 or 3 sizable fish, so I'm pretty happy with that. That's not a bad result, really. On a different day, maybe we would have had a hatful of good ones. You never know, do you? The thin lips are mullet after all, and they can be very fussy and very pernickety, and that's part of the beauty of it. Right, so there's a few important elements to consider when you're spinning in river environments like this. One of the first things to consider is the flow. Are you fishing with the flow, against the flow, across the flow? It'll make a big difference in how fast or slow you can retrieve your spinner while keeping the blade ticking over. And it can make a difference to how the fish react to it as well. So that's one element to be aware of and to experiment with throughout the course of your session. Another thing is, well, I mean, this is true in any sort of fishing really, isn't it? But hot spots in the tide, you'll generally find that the venues you fish will tend to give their best fishing at certain points of the tide or certain times of the day. And that's something that you can learn with trial and error, or speaking to anglers who know the venues you fish. And quite often outside of those times you'll find that the fish appear to be nearly oblivious to your spinner, or even scared of it. And that can be quite frustrating if you're not accustomed to that in your fishing. And then oftentimes they'll switch on and it's like, oh, they've suddenly turned into suicidal mackerel. It can be a bit like that. So these are things that it's a good idea to be prepared for in your fishing. They won't always respond the same to the spinner, and it won't always be obvious why. But usually what you should find is that if you persist and you try different spinners, try different presentations, vary things slightly, you'll hit on something that they will accept at some point or another. So today what I'm doing is I'm fishing a bombarder float, a very light spinner, there's no weight to it at all. So I'm just varying between casting upstream, casting across and casting downstream. The difference is when I cast upstream I have to retrieve the spinner a little bit quicker to keep the blade ticking over. When I cast across, that's kind of the best of both worlds. I can retrieve at a nice steady pace that feels right. And if I cast downstream I can slow the retrieve of the spinner right down. So sometimes that's what they want that spinner really, really slow. And you'll find that out on the day. Okay, so let's talk about the kind of bite indications you can expect from mullet. Obviously the one you really want is where they just take it sweet and it all goes solid and you've hooked a fish. Then that's happy days. But you'll get all sorts of other things as well. You get little plucks and nips. You'll quite often hook a fish that will very soon come off, and that's just because they've not hooked themselves properly. And you'll also get a really weird one from time to time, especially when you're fishing against the current. Everything will just suddenly go light and your spinner will stop working. And sometimes you'll be able to see what's caused that, and oftentimes it's a mullet that's either bumped the spinner with its nose and jolted it forward, or it's got the whole bait and hook assembly in its mouth and it's moved forward with it. And usually what happens then is the mullet just spits it out. And it boggles the mind when you see this over and over again, how they're able to take multiple hooks in their mouths and not get hooked at all, basically. They're renowned for being able to eject hooks. It's part of the joy of mullet fishing. So it's quite rare to actually hook a fish like that, like for you to catch up quick enough to set the hook in its mouth. The important thing is, if you're getting little indications and things like that, to just keep spinning, keep reeling until everything goes solid. And then that's the time to bend into it, set the hook, and hopefully your fish will stay on until it gets on dry land. Fingers crossed. Of course, retrieve speed is something that varies a lot from angler to angler, and you'll tend to find you have a natural pace. And for some people this is nice and slow. For other people like me, I have a habit of reeling a bit too fast, so I have to slow myself down at times, so don't be surprised if this is the case for you. That's not to say though that you can't catch mullet on a pretty brisk retrieve, because sometimes you can. It might be what they want on the day. But as a general rule, one followed then. As a general rule, you see the popular advice being to retrieve at a pace that where the spinner's just ticking over, and that's pretty good advice, I think. If you do that, you'll tend to have the right speed for most occasions. That's one of the good things about using the bombarder float as well. You can get those really slow retrieves even in shallow water, because you're keeping the spinner up off the bottom. So sometimes if you really need to keep things slow, the bombarder can help you do that. So this evening I've come to a Cornish surf beach to fish for golden grey mullet with a spinner. Spinning for them is probably not as popular in other parts of the country as it is down here, but in Cornwall we have the clarity of water and the nice flat sandy beaches that kind of favour the style. The mullet tend to push in with the warmer weather, and they, especially if it's been a warm day, a nice sunny day, as the tide floods in over the sand, you'll get nice big shoals of them coming, and if they're keen you can pick off quite a few with a spinner. It's really exciting fishing. You can see them following them, chasing, and when you get one on you can see it turning cartwheels in the water, because you're in there with them, you see everything. It's great fun, so let's go down there and see if we can get a few. Here we go, beautiful golden grey mullet that fell for the baited spinner with harbour ragworm. About third cast this one was. I spotted a group of fish, got in amongst them, lost one first go. Second cast, the presentation was all fluffed, so re-rigged, put out a third one, and this guy had it. Gave a nice little fight when he got in close. He wasn't doing so much further out, but when he got in tight among the waves, he had a right little go and got his head down. So it was a fun scrap with him. Probably, he's not £2, he's probably 112, something like that, I think. But lovely way to start the session. Hopefully get a few more now. Okay, some fish out there. Going to cover them. There's a take straight away. There's a lot of fish there. And they're in the mood. Yep. There's one. Whoa! They're so spirited, they really are. They kind of remind me of the mullet answer to spotted ray, because although they're the smallest in size, they've really got a lot of attitude, you know. One of the great things about them. And this method of catching them is so, whoa, he's really going. This method of catching them is so much more enjoyable than sitting behind a ledgering rod with Maddie baits. Keeps you active in the surf, keeps you looking. That's the key to this game, is sight fishing, finding the fish and putting your spinner in their path. And if you can do that, then sooner or later they will switch on usually. Like other mullet, they can ignore your spinner for a long time. And there's a couple of things you can do about that. You can change your spinner. You can try a smaller blade or a bigger blade or even a coloured blade. You can change the distance between the blade and the bait. Sometimes that makes a difference. Or you can change the mass of your spinner, the depth, and that controls the depth of which it fishes, obviously. I can remember one time coming out here, and Kevin Griffiths was fishing out here, who I filmed last year on these same species on this same venue, and he cleaned up then. And he was fishing out here, and I was really struggling. I had a few follows and maybe a couple of fish, and Kevin was hauling. He was getting fish. Well, it seemed to me like every time I looked over he had a fish on it. It was like that. And I thought, I'll go and have a look and see what he's doing different. And as I was passing, I could see his spinner was fishing a lot deeper. So I changed to a heavier spinner, and yeah, I started doing a bit better. So that was a lesson. It's a nice fish, this. He's certainly got plenty of strength in him. I don't think he's that big, but he's certainly a solid fish. Come on, my beauty. They look just like bonefish in the water when they come through the waves like that. Well, what I imagine a bonefish looks like, because I've never actually been fishing for them. But and when people refer to mullet as the British bonefish, this is the kind of mullet fishing I imagine, not standing in a muddy river somewhere fishing for a thick or a thin. It's standing in the surf in beautiful, like tropical clear water, fishing for these guys. And I think this guy's ready for. I've got a little bucket here that I use as an impromptu net when I'm further out. Oh, come on. And he's bucketed. Great fight. Let's have a look at him. He's a solid sort of £1.5 sort of size. And he put up a nice account of himself. I'm pleased with that fish. well, he's got both hooks, he wasn't going anywhere. And, get that one and then that one, I don't really want to hurt him. Bye bye fella, you're a fantastic sport. They do this sometimes, they just loiter around your legs for a bit before they go. That one was after my float. Right at the end of the retrieve. I was literally drawing it. Oh no. That was a good fish too. That's bigger than the other ones. I was literally just drawing it through like a fly fisherman then at the end of the retrieve, and that one just dashed and nailed it. Right. Again. Fish all over the shop. Yep. Hey! God, the gyrations of this one are amazing. It's up the line, it's absolutely crazy. Go on, mate! He's a scrapper. Not a terribly big fish again. I'm going to bring this one to hand, I think. And, So that was a good little session there, some nice fish and some good little scraps in the surf. Hopefully that's fired your imagination a bit and got you thinking of places where you can fish for golden greys in your area with the bait spinner. Spinning for them is really effective, it's a great method, and it's really exciting too. I think that's the main thing. It's great fun, and I highly recommend giving it a try. So I hope you've enjoyed this general overview of mullet spinning. Really is a fantastic form of fishing. It's one of my favourites and I really do enjoy it. If you've got any questions or anything you'd like to add, please do so in the comments below. I'll do my best to get to it as soon as I can. Above all, I'd really like to encourage you to have a go at this kind of fishing if you haven't before. It's super sport and fantastic fun. Chances are that wherever you are in the country, there'll be some sort of mullet nearby that you can have a go at. So get out there and get spinning.